Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the National Press Club of Australia. My name is Sabra Lane. I am the club's president. I'm also the presenter of the ABC radio program AM. We have three guest speakers here today. Nicole Rose, the Chief Executive of AUSTRAC, the Australian Transaction Reports and Analysis Centre. Michael Phelan, Chief Executive of the Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission, and the new AFP Commissioner, Rhys Kershaw. Welcome to you all. If you're following this conversation online, you'll find us on Twitter. Our user handle is @PressClubAUST. You can also use the hashtag NPC. We're speaking here today about countering child sexual abuse and exploitation, and I would like to acknowledge two special guests that we have here in the room today. Sonia Ryan and her son Bailey Day. Sonia founded the Carly Ryan Foundation 10 years ago. It was named after her daughter Carly. Carly was murdered 13 years ago today by someone who was an online predator. We welcome you both here to the club today. Our speaking order, first up is Mike Phelan. Mike.
Thank you, Sabra. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. Minister Dutton, members of the Press Club, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for attending here today. It's a great pleasure to be here with my colleagues, Nicole Rose and Rhys Kershaw. But before I begin, on behalf of all three of us, I'd like to pay my respects to the elders of the owners of the traditional owners of the land in which we meet today. So thank you very much. Collaboration across law enforcement and intelligence agencies is key to tackling serious and organised crime, and especially when countering child sexual exploitation and abuse. The Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission works with our partners to prevent criminal activity and respond to crime affecting Australia. By working together, we have the best chance to target these criminals. However, as the digital environment evolves, so does the threat. Now, just for a little bit of context, serious and organised crime costs Australia an estimated $47.4 billion a year, and the ACIC assesses that 70% of Australia's organised criminal threats are based offshore or have strong offshore links. In recognition of this global threat, the ACIC's Australia Priority Organisation Target, or APOT list, focuses on the highest threat serious and organised crime targets impacting Australia. This is a dynamic list and currently contains 18 named entities. All but one of these top-tier targets, both Australian and non-Australian, are based offshore. Serious and organised crime groups are better organised, better resourced, and more than ever before, being run like multinational corporations, with communications a key to the success of their business model. These criminals are motivated by profit and will engage in any activity that increases their bottom line, including child sexual exploitation and abuse. Law enforcement and intelligence community faces a growing challenge in infiltrating and disrupting the activities of organised crime and child exploitation syndicates. Their use of the dark web and encrypted technologies to obfuscate their identity and facilitate high-volume offending on a global scale has become the new status quo for these criminals. New and world-leading research in this field continues to drive home these findings. Today, the Australian Institute of Criminology will release a new paper, which in the first of its kind, analyses data on payments that were likely made by Australians for child sexual abuse streaming. In this paper, AFP information on criminals operating in the Philippines was overlaid with AUSTRAC knowledge of financial payments and ACIC criminal history data to gain insights into Australians live streaming child sexual abuse, their criminal history and demographic data. The study looked at 256 unique individuals who made over 2,700 transactions to known live streaming facilitators in the Philippines. The paper highlights that live streaming of child sexual abuse leaves very little online trace nor record, as well as how technology is enabling its proliferation, therefore making it increasingly difficult for law enforcement to combat this devastating crime. Communications technology is at the heart of law enforcement's problem today. Technology is attractive to criminals as it can provide anonymity, obfuscate activities and locations, and increase their global reach by connecting them to potential victims and information around the world. The online environment enables crime to be committed remotely, with less resources and with less chance of detection. Sadly, history tells us that facilitators of child exploitation material frequently act as early adopters of new technologies to prevent detection of their activities and platforms by law enforcement. Communications technologies such as encryption are increasingly exploited by criminals to conceal their illegal activities. 90% of the ACIC's current investigations now involve some form of encryption. For example, we see an ever increasing use of high-end encrypted smartphones that are far more sophisticated than the traditional over-the-top applications you may have on your phone now, like WhatsApp, Wickr or Signal. In practical terms, this means that we simply cannot see what these destructive criminal groups are saying to one another. Not only are the criminals concealing their communications, but they're also finding new platforms to conduct and grow their operations. Australia's use of dark web marketplaces is expected to increase into the future, given the increasing popularity of online trading and perceived anonymity such marketplaces provide. So how did we come to this? If we go back to 1979, when telecommunications interception became lawful under Commonwealth legislation, an agency could expect that it would be able to lawfully intercept most, if not all, of a criminal target's communications. It was quite simple. We had one number, we had one phone, and importantly, we only had one provider. It is safe to say that in 2020, this expectation is no longer a reality. Multiple service or application providers may now be involved in any one criminal communication. Criminals commonly use multiple devices and applications to communicate, and free accounts can be established quickly and with no clear connection to real-life identity. The substantial and fast changes in this communications environment have rapidly eroded our ability to intercept communications and critically impacted our capabilities. To address these escalating challenges, we need to be open to considering new and better ways of countering this insidious business of crime. Modernising and adapting the regime that governs lawful access to communications is a fundamental first step. Simply put, right now, our laws do not keep up with the technology. To ensure legislation maintains pace with the rate of adoption of new technology by criminals, it must be adaptable and arguably technology agnostic. In 2013, the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security, after a long and in-depth inquiry, gave bipartisan support to enable lawful interception and access based on particular communication attributes. Adapting our approach could enable agencies to exclude or include particular communications within a service through relevant identifiers. This could include the time or location of a communication, or an identifier or address that uniquely identifies a service or account, such as an email address. An attribute-based approach would offer additional privacy protections as well to innocent individuals using these platforms by better targeting communications which are known to belong to serious criminal threats. Finally, as Australia advances both in terms of increasing globalisation and use of digital platforms, so do the threats to our well-being, with none more serious than the threat to our children. The challenge is to ensure that our agencies are equipped with contemporary skills and technologies backed by necessary powers to combat criminal exploitation of encrypted technologies and the dark web. All of this, of course, coupled with the appropriate checks and balances that society rightfully demands. In my view, it is time to start the debate again. Thank you.
Nicole.
Thanks, Mike. It is great to be here together to talk about some of the work that we are doing to tackle serious and organised crime. However, what a sad indictment it is on our so-called civilised society that one of our top priorities is combating child sexual abuse. As Australia's financial intelligence agency and money laundering and counter-terrorism financing regulator, AUSTRAC is uniquely placed to play a key part in countering child exploitation and abuse. Our role includes analysing the financial transactions we receive from the financial services sector. We use this information to look for indicators of criminal behaviour and generate financial intelligence. And this is then shared with law enforcement agencies to inform investigations to find and convict the perpetrators of these abhorrent crimes against children. As Mike said, one of our greatest challenges is the advancement of communications technology without corresponding legislation to close gaps for criminal exploitation. The mere fact that one criminal communication may involve multiple service or application providers has required AUSTRAC to fill a growing need to access and analyse hundreds of thousands of financial transactions. We've been working together with law enforcement and industry partners to better target and disrupt this type of offending, resulting in a significant increase in the identification of previously unknown targets for investigation of child abuse. While motivation for the exploitation has varied, there has been an increase in the sexual exploitation of children for financial gain. Often poor and disadvantaged families are paid by facilitators for children and infants to be abused live on camera. And of course, whilst child sexual abuse has sadly existed for centuries, it generally relied on an offender's physical access to a child. That, of course, is no longer an impediment. Advancements in technology now make it possible for offenders to order, pay and view the live streaming of children being abused anywhere in the world. Live streaming, as Mike said, if not recorded, leaves no visual evidence behind. Other clues are often difficult or onerous to locate as perpetrators actively take steps to hide their offending, utilising technology to anonymise transactions and avoid scrutiny. Financial transaction was once only a small part of evidence relied on to find and convict offenders. But today, police rely on financial transaction information and subsequent pattern analysis more than ever before. Because the most sophisticated, serious and organised crime syndicates operate internationally, money is frequently transferred electronically, meaning financial data is often the only evidence linking entities. So it is currently our challenge to find and follow the often convoluted financial trail and work with our partners to build a picture of the offending. In Mike's opening, he mentioned that AUSTRAC provided transaction data to the AIC to support their study released today. The transactions we provided concerned 256 individuals resident in Australia who had made at least one transaction to a known facilitator in the Philippines. Many of the Australians identified with sending funds were previously completely unknown to law enforcement. In fact, these offenders were actively taking steps to hide their movements in our community. Taken together, findings from these cases can assist to form a profile of offenders. The study showed that these individuals were likely to be aged in their 50s and 60s, and over half had no criminal record. And of those who did have a criminal record, only 10% had a sexual offence recorded. Of course, this crime involves victims in many countries, but partnership with our global law enforcement partners and NGOs, we've identified that the Philippines is a hub for this live streaming abuse. As today's report outlines, this can be sadly attributed to factors of poverty, a high level of English speaking, strong internet coverage, and reliable services to facilitate payment. And it's alarming that there's a continuing trend of Australians purchasing, viewing and directing the abuse of children on the internet. While these offenders may try and stay under the radar at home, a pattern of escalation in their crime may also compel them to travel out of the country to offend. Working closely with the Department of Home Affairs, we've developed a financial targeting system to assist with the interception of travellers at the border. Since September 2019, this has resulted in the detection of 14 people with child exploitation material and arrests of 7 persons for child-related offending. And among these arrests was a school principal. Internationally, we share information with nearly 100 other financial intelligence or regulatory units across the world. And last year we had over 3,500 international exchanges of financial intelligence. In the 2018-19 financial year, our partners conducted over 2 million searches to assist their investigations, with our Home Affairs colleagues in the ABF, AFP and ACIC being major users in the efforts to fight serious crime. And of course, our final key partner is industry. We partner with industry through Austrac's Fintel Alliance, a public-private partnership with 28 members from industry, government and law enforcement. The private sector is a crucial component at the front line of defence for both our financial system and for the protection of our community. In late 2019, Austrac's Fintel Alliance shared insights and understanding of indicators of financial activity that may identify child abuse, including live streaming. Through these efforts, we have seen a 643% increase in suspicious matter reporting compared to before the formation of the Alliance. The benefit of this reporting was recently highlighted following the arrest of a New South Wales man involved in sending money for child abuse material. Financial information identified the man and supported our partners' efforts to locate and rescue 5 children in the Philippines. Clearly, there's a great deal more work to be done to ensure our children's safety and the many challenges ahead. But the increase in collaboration is already resulting in significant outcomes. But I'd like to echo what Mike said. What is holding us back is legislation lagging behind technology. And with that, let me hand over to Commissioner Kershaw.
Thank you. Thank you. That's Nicole Rose, the Chief Executive of Austrac, and now the new Commissioner of the Australian Federal Police, Rhys Kershaw. Thanks, Rhys.
Thank you, Sabra. Minister, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Today, I want to lift the lid on society's dark secret. I want to shine a light on the ever-increasing online exploitation of our children by those that seek to do harm, deviant and perverted offenders with global reach who are using the dark web to evade law enforcement detection and commit heinous crimes against our most vulnerable. We all think we can use the clear web or the surface web safely, so long as we follow some basic precautions. Yet this is where predators hunt for our children. And the dark web is a more sinister place where these predators lurk and hide in complete anonymity. Over a decade ago, the AFP received 300 referrals for online child exploitation material a year. Last year, the AFP had just under 17,000. In the US, it's in the millions. And understand that each referral is not a single file. It could be thousands, millions of videos and pictures of children being sexually abused. The Australian Centre to Counter Child Exploitation, the ACE, are dealing with a database of 22 million seized videos and images and will soon merge with a Queensland database of another 50 million. We are seeing more videos, younger children, more violence. We are seeing the rape and torture of our children, all for sexual gratification. And Australian offenders are involved in producing this material. They travel to impoverished places and they exploit vulnerable children. They use the dark web like a weapon. They use encryption like a sword and anonymity like a shield to harm our children and avoid justice. This is organised crime, but the commodity is children. I want you to know, though, that law enforcement fights for those who can't, and we speak for those who can't. And our basic mission is to prevent crime and disorder. But I want to not only prevent, but defeat and eradicate this crime. For example, the AFP and partners in 2 states identified a Victorian man through images of the sexual exploitation of his nieces, then aged 9 and 11. But the material had been produced over the preceding 5 years. On arresting him, it was evident that he had sexually abused his own 8-month-old twin girls. The twins were born to a surrogate mother overseas, and he started abusing them when they were 3 weeks old. We rescued those children from harm's way, but know this man had been exploiting them and producing child exploitation material for 8 months and sharing that material with other offenders, and if he wasn't stopped, he would have continued to do so. We solved that case because we identified the victims. But when Interpol looked at the unique images of their database, more than 1.1 million images and videos, there were nearly 600,000 unidentified victims, children that we have no idea who or where they are. How do you bring justice to an offender's doorstep when you don't know where their doorstep is? The dark web doesn't only provide anonymity for individuals and networks, but for whole websites, servers, untold volumes of material. It's a digital black spot. The We Protect Alliance estimates 2.8 million users across just the 10 most harmful dark websites. 2.8 million users logging on, ordering whatever they want. I quote here from a dark web forum from one of our investigations involving a child who was continually sexually abused and on show for an entire criminal network. I quote, "Love your 5-year-old. Next time, place candles around her in a circle and write a greeting note on her stomach to the group." Predators are directing this abuse like they're directing films. A family carer arrested in South Australia ran a dark website with 45,000 active members worldwide. He was a contact offender. And we see people moving from viewing material to abusing children themselves as they become drawn further into these horrific networks. There are Australian forums active right now with over 100,000 members and global sites with over 1 million visitors, all of who believe they can offend with impunity. They do fear us, but they believe we can't find them, and we have to continue to hunt them down, and we won't stop. Our capabilities and legislation are having to evolve to meet this threat. I understand that encryption protects a lot of things, but when it is weaponised to harm our children, then we need to consider our response. I welcome ideas, innovative ideas from industry, but we have an immediate problem to address. Industry has been playing an active role. In 2018, a US NGO received 18.4 million cyber tip referrals from tech companies. But the bulk of those, 12 million of them, are from Facebook. And once it encrypts its messenger service, we may lose them all. If we can work together on this and find solutions that are safeguarded, proportionate and just, then we can better protect our children. We are in discussions regarding how we might work with the US government under the Cloud Act to streamline requests for key evidence held by US-based companies. And we welcome more discussion on policing the dark web, taking the fight to the digital doorstep and dragging these offenders into the light. Sometimes we're great at matching the pace of change, and I welcome the government's speed in legislating against childlike sex dolls. The Toller Amendment was another important step in dealing with the encryption offenders hide behind. So was the introduction of the Commonwealth offences for possessing child exploitation material, passed last year and then used only days later in Melbourne and again in South Australia and New South Wales. Investment into the AFP-led ACE is leading the way in multi-agency collaboration that is essential in this fight. And I thank the Minister for this initiative. And the ACE is working on an enhanced victim identification capability at the national and international level, coordinating our fight and sharing the burden. These investments are important because our people who police these crimes are doing a tough job. We owe them this. If they will do the worst job, we need to give them the best tools. And in the audience today, is Detective Inspector John Rouse, an operations manager at the ACE. And John has been a police officer for 36 years and is a pioneer in this field. He describes his work in victim identification as the most rewarding of his career. And when asked why, he says it's because, unlike many other crime types, he gets a chance to stop the crime. He gets the chance to remove those children from harm, sometimes before they're even old enough to remember. I want to be able to face people in the future when today's children have grown into tomorrow's leaders and tell them that I have put everything I had into this fight, that we recognise how the environment has changed and we moved to change with it, that we protected our children, and we, all of us here, have a moral responsibility to get this right. We do need to unite the fight to deliver maximum damage to the criminal environment. Law enforcement, our home affairs, government, industry, NGOs, communities, all of us working together with appropriate powers and resources, fighting for our children. That's how we achieve justice. Thank you.
I just want to run through some numbers for people who might be watching at home and might have been alarmed by some of the information they've been hearing about today. If you are an abuse victim and you need help, there are some numbers that you can call. 1800 555 677. That is for the Respect number that can help with confidential information, counselling and support. Of course, if you want to report a crime, you can ring 000 if you're in immediate danger, or you can ring Crime Stoppers on 1800 333 000. Mike Phelan and Nicole Rose, you mentioned this report that's out today by the Institute, and you've talked about the offenders here in Australia, but I'm also interested in the abuse victims in the Philippines. What do we know about them, and have we identified these people? Have they been given support? Because they are big victims in all of this. What's happening there?
Yeah, I'm more than happy to take this. I know the AFP is responsible for most of the dealing with, say, the NBI or the Philippine National Police, but I can tell you that all the information from my experience when I was there that we do get from this field goes back to the Philippines, and children have actually been rescued. The AFP with the NBI and with the Philippine National Police have gone and rescued children. Where the organisation can pinpoint exactly where they are, the children are rescued. Absolutely.
In how many cases does that happen?
I don't know off the top of my head, to be quite frank.
No, I don't know either, Sabra, but definitely we work with a number of the government agencies in the Philippines. They're actually very proactive about that, and AFP are actually doing a lot of that work with them. They're very proactive. I know of at least 20 children just on our financial data, but I'd have to go to the AFP.
That's 20 children in the last financial year?
Yes.
Or?
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to clarify the exact figure, but we have an office over there who work hand in glove with the Philippines authorities, and when we get the referral or we detect that, we take action with those agencies, understanding that it is sovereign land in the Philippines as far as this goes, but they're really alive to it and understand that they are a market for our travelling offenders that used to be able to go to the Philippines. Now that we've seen a 65% drop in registered sex offenders being able to go offshore due to the changes in the passports cancellation, but also travel restrictions, which is really pleasing because, as I said, we want to prevent this crime, but we also want to eradicate it.
All right. Our first question from the floor is Renee Valeris.
Hi, thank you so much for your address today. Commissioner Kershaw, in the absence of Facebook and other tech giants helping law enforcement agencies, what laws do you want? What do you need in this fight? And what do you fear if you don't get them?
Yeah. Oh, look, you're probably asking a police officer, you know, what laws. They'll say every law, but lots of laws. I think for us, it's how do we, handle the encryption issue. And as I said, it's being weaponised right now. So how do we work with the telcos, with other industry giants to say we need to have a solution to this, and it needs to be balanced. When you're committing a crime, I think all bets are off. That, I guess keeping your encryption turned on, we need to think that through. I'm not going to just jump to a solution because I think we need to be really careful how we work through this as well, because Ideally, what would be great is we're able to get at our undersea cables, for example, and prevent this material even running across into our country. You know, if you looked at us as a virtual border, wouldn't it be great if we could protect our borders virtually? It's incredibly difficult from a technical point of view. But, you know, I think for us it's about, you know, working with our minister and with the government of the day as to what some of the challenges our investigators in the front line are confronting. Right now, I spoke to the ACE. They're pretty happy with what we have, but there are some challenges there in some additional legislation. But it wouldn't be really right for me to sort of ventilate that here.
Do any of you want to add to that?
Thanks, Sabra, and thanks, Ray. Look, the way I see it is what we need to do is simplify law enforcement's ability to get at this information. And the legislation has just not kept pace with the technology. Like I said in my speech, you know, one phone, one number, one provider. Over the years, we've had amendments to legislation to make it simpler. For example, if you've got multiple people using the same handset or different handsets, we've made it like that. We're able to intercept those communications. But as the communications go very much into the dark zone, sometimes it's very difficult to actually identify who the offender is. And our interception legislation is very much at the moment driven around a device and a person and an offence. What we'd like is to make it a lot easier to be able to get in, have a look, with all the safeguards that are necessary to be able to grab particular attributes of crime. So this is what I talked to mine, which went through the PJCIS, 6 years ago now, when I remember myself and David Irvine, the former head of ASIO, would get up and give a number of speeches about going dark. Well, we've gone more than going dark. You know, it's much worse for us now. And we just need to be able to keep pace with that. So we don't want our criminals to hide behind encryption and obfuscation of their communications.
Can you give us an example? Practically, what do you want? Do you want to go to a service provider and say, we think this guy's using...
Okay, to be quite simple,
Yeah.
let's look at my broadband at home, okay? At the moment you could get a warrant to intercept my broadband, okay? But you don't want my Netflix, you don't want my Channel 7 streaming, you don't want my daughters getting onto the system, you know, when their mobiles flick onto the home broadband. What you want is my criminal communications with someone. Now, it is possible, you know, technologically, as has been explained to me a number of years ago, to be able to strip out particular information that relates to particular attributes that we identify in law enforcement as being important. So, for example, keywords, different types of comms, specifically maybe email addresses or something like that. So we strip out the information rather than take the whole lot in a massive pipe and have to sit on it, which is what we have to do at the moment. We have to take terabytes of information and sit on it when I don't want any of it. All I really want is the criminal communications that are there. Our legislation does not provide for that at the moment. And also, I quickly talked about the privacy. And that's right. If you're looking at me, my children and my wife should have privacy over their communications in my house. At the moment, it's all taken, right? That's, in a modern way communications work, when you can strip out mine, why wouldn't you? That's just the way I look at it. Quite simple.
Andrew Tillett.
Andrew Tillett from the Financial Review. Thank you, all three of you, for your presentations today. A question for you, Miss Rose. As someone who heads an agency that's claimed the head of the scalps of two of the big four banks, of the CEOs, through money laundering scandals and things like that, I just wonder if there has been changes from the bank's attitude into their compliance with these with the laws and regulations that you oversee, particularly since the Westpac allegations late last year. Have you started to see that sort of cultural change coming, or have banks started to realise they do have very big issues in this particular space?
Absolutely, Andrew. Obviously, after the CBA action, there was a great deal of reaction to the particular failings that CBA had, and we saw a massive increase in reporting after that. And similarly, we've seen some of the increase to do with the serious matter reporting, and child sexual exploitation reporting has certainly increased. in the last 6 months. Now, whether that's directly attributable to any action, we've also put out a lot of educational material at the same time to do with that sort of issue. But yes, absolutely, because that's what enforcement's about. It's about changing behaviour and making sure that attention is given to those particular areas of compliance. So yes.
Anthony Galloway.
Anthony Galloway from The Age and Sydney Morning Herald. A question for Mr Kershaw. We've spoken about putting appropriate safeguards in place for accessing encrypted communication. It's been suggested recently that law enforcement should have to go to a judge or perhaps the AAT instead of just the agency head ticking off on it. Would you be comfortable with that, or would that curtail investigations in any way?
I guess my question would be for what reason. If they're a judicial officer, then they're competent, and if the Act says that we can do that, we'll continue to do that. I think it would take, obviously, legislative change, but I am comfortable with the current system.
Andrew Probyn.
Andrew Probyn from the ABC. We've got AFP, AUSTRAC and ACIC here. There's one agency with an acronym beginning with A that hasn't been mentioned so far, and that's ASD. Now, so can we cut to the chase here? Because when Annika Smethurst broke that story, and I understand it infuriated people in intelligence agencies, it infuriated the minister over there, because the allegation that there would be mass surveillance was one that was fiercely rejected. But can you confirm that it is actually central to the plan here to give ASD some extra powers to help, perhaps under with the protections that you talked about before, to allow them to look into the dark web? Because the problem that you've all talked about is in the dark web. You don't know where the server is. It might be that the people who are abusing children in the Philippines actually have their server in Sydney. So can we get some honest assessment here, and perhaps one of you might mention ASD, because isn't that at the heart of what we're really talking about today?
I'm happy. I'm anything but honest. I always, you'll never die wondering what I'm thinking. At the end of the day, and as the legislation currently exists, ASD can help law enforcement. Okay, they can help us do what we need to do, so long as there's a lawful authority to do so under Australian law. So there's nothing to stop ASD helping any of our agencies at the moment, so long as we have a lawful authority to do so. So when we're talking about modernising the interception regime, it would be law enforcement that would get those powers, which would make no extra burden or requirement for ASD other than that which they already have, which is to be able to help law enforcement if they have the ability to do so, particularly with things like tools and whatever they're able to do within the confines of what's legislatively possible, also within the bounds of what is confidential as well. Because as you know, in a law enforcement environment, we have heavy rules around disclosure. And it's important that we have rules around disclosure for under our system of justice in this country. So, in short, there's nothing to stop them helping us now with what we do.
Commissioner?
Well, they do help us under those frameworks, so offshore, internationally. So,
Offshore internationally, that's not the question.
You're saying onshore?
Yeah.
Well, at the moment, they don't, except for, I think, if you look at the AECSC, they do get involved in, as we've seen, where companies are hacked and they use their skills there to try and, I guess, restore networks and critical infrastructure, and also provide that advice to those industry, but we're not using them domestically.
Finbar O'Malley.
Finbar O'Malley from AAP. You're hinting at getting around encryption here. I'm drawing your attention to 2017, the WannaCry and NotPetya attacks, which used known exploits to hack into Windows systems, so global outages. Then even here in the ACT, ACT policing have illegally accessed Canberrans' metadata over 3,000 times. So I guess Australians is going to have to accept that these tools may be used against them by bad actors, but also by law enforcement as well.
We're not interested in going after people who are not serious and organised criminals, and child exploitation material is serious and organised by definition. That's the way they organise, do themselves. So we're not interested in going after those sort of materials. The other thing that's important distinction I want to make is we were talking before about metadata access and agency heads and agency officials ticking off it, which is the same as what you're talking about in ACT policing. There's a difference between metadata and content data. Content data is very, very intrusive. That's why we go to a judge. If we were to go through a judge or lawful authority to get metadata, which is what we do now and what we've done since 1979, then it would be absolutely onerous for law enforcement. The AFP, state police, ACIC, every law enforcement agency in this country would grind to a halt if we had to do it. I can't even remember the figure, but a couple of years, it was 56,000 requests that have to be made. If we had to go to a judge for every single one of those just to get some metadata, which doesn't say what you said, doesn't record what you said, does say who you may have talked to, but even then, it's only the identifier that you talk to. I don't know who held the phone, who was there, who talked on it. That's up to investigative techniques to get through. So it's part of a mosaic for law enforcement to do their job. It is absolutely critical. If we were to ever have any wind back of those sort of provisions, we might as well give up and go home.
It's interesting that you're all here making the case for strengthened laws today. Why are you making that case instead of the Minister Peter Dutton?
Because we're sitting here.
But usually he would make the argument if he wants to negotiate, because I'm hazarding a guess that once you draft these laws, that the problem will come in the Senate. Why are you making the case and not Peter Dutton?
I don't know if that's a good question to ask us.
I'm happy. At the end of the day, we are the ones who represent society through our operational activity. We are the ones who enforce the laws of the Commonwealth and the Parliament. If the Parliament wants us to do that, we'll do it. It's also incumbent on us as public servants and agency heads to bring deficiencies in the system forward. Okay? This deficiency that we're talking about now, that I alluded to, didn't exist years ago. Wouldn't have had to have the conversation. But now in 2020, I have to have the conversation because we cannot hear what the criminals are saying, nor see what they're saying. So it's up to us to make the argument. So look, this thing about whether the Minister makes the argument or we make the argument, to be quite frank, we have to make the argument first, is my view. Because my troops, they're on the front line, they see this all the time. So they're the ones bringing the problems to me, and I bring the problems to the government. It's my job.
Sabra, can I add to that? AUSTRAC, the encryption laws don't impact on AUSTRAC and we don't work with ASD. But why I'm here to discuss what we're doing in this space is, as I said, financial intelligence was never relied on so heavily in the past to be the only way to actually identify and track down an offender. Now, that's just wrong. The fact that financial intelligence is the only thing that is actually allowing us to find offenders because of encrypted technology is substandard. And if law enforcement need to have more visibility to continue the investigative work that they have been doing for decades, then legislation needs to respond to that.
What about the approach too that a lot of these people wouldn't be acting completely alone? People would have suspicions. Why aren't you getting more of that intelligence saying, I worry about what this person's up to?
I think what happens is that people struggle to believe it. And I've spoken to those individuals, and there might be your father, your brother, your sister, and they struggle to comprehend that because it's such a horrific crime. And a huge taboo, besides it being a crime. And I think Some people do. They do know that it's been going on. They're just not prepared to confront it. And I think one of the things we do in law enforcement is we try and get a feel for the house. If we're doing a warrant, for example, we try and get a feel for what's actually happening in this house. Does someone know? Have they known for a while? And you tend to be able to work that out very quickly, or it's a crime type that, in my own experience, sometimes you leave that house having more questions than answers. And as an example, it may be that the father is divorced from the wife but has access to the kids, and the images that he's downloading in videos are very similar to his young children, but the wife will say, no, there's nothing happening to my children. So you sort of leave that with, one is you've charged that person, but you wonder, are they a contact offender? Have they contact offended against their own children? So it's quite complex. We are trying to get that message out there, though, to probably, people have to understand that they should report it.
Yeah. What's your advice to someone who has a nagging doubt?
I think they need to report it, and they can, to whether it's their local police station or through to us, or different avenues. Crime Stoppers is always a good one if you want to be anonymous, for example. And I think that's where we do get some tips through there, and referrals is people dobbing in their relative or friend or whatever. And some people have a nagging suspicion, but it's a big thing to do, a big step to make. But, and then also you have the other challenge we have too is when people are out on bail or they come out, they continue to offend. And they're the ones as well that the relatives and friends need to actually report that, because we'll end up coming back to that house or that unit or that location to make the arrest.
And Sabra, Reece is talking about the 45%, so if you look at the study the ARC's just done, the 45% that have a criminal history and are known to police. In that study, they found that 55% were completely unknown to police with no criminal record. So they're living in the community with jobs and families and neighbours as not offending and not known to police, not known to authorities. So people often either just think it can't be true or don't feel confident that it could be because they're, all intents and purposes, a decent person.
Annabelle Hennessy.
Hi, thank you for your speeches today. Last year, Attorney General Christian Porter introduced new laws which were tougher sentences for those convicted of federal child sex abuse charges. At the time, Mr. Porter said about more than 20% of those convicted under federal charges were not receiving jail time. How important are strict sentences as a deterrent factor? And is it an issue that courts are typically giving tougher sentences to those that have been convicted on charges of physical abuse versus viewing materials online of abuse?
Well, I think that a couple of things there is, one is law enforcement has been educating courts to understand this is not, we don't like the terminology child pornography or kiddie porn. It's actually abhorrent to police officers. Just do not appreciate that at all, because it's not photos of naked young girls. It's rape and torture and beyond. It's stuff that you will make your stomach churn and you'd sweat and everything and just go, I can't believe that our society is like this. So that's one thing. So courts have traditionally not been interested in even viewing, and I was even speaking to the ACE team the other day, and they're still hesitant to want to view any of the material, the judges. So that's a challenge for us. So we're always going to say, look, it's not, don't read in the media the child, you'll see it. I could probably pull it up today and it'll be in there, kiddie porn or child porn. It's not. It's actually abuse and rape and torture. So I think until we have that conversation where the judiciary understand a couple of things. One is these people, they're hardwired this way. They can't change. So there's study after study. It's some people would say it's controversial, but they will not probably change. So that's one thing. I think the second thing is that my view is eventually they'll become, if they're not a contact offender, they will become. Now that's another controversial, there's not enough study done in this area around the continuum from being downloading and participating in these networks to actually then offending in the real world. My view is it's a matter of time. So that's part of our prevention strategy, because we think that that feeds you actually going to, and same with the sex dolls. Eventually, the child sex dolls, you will offend in the real world. And there's law enforcement are pretty strong in their view on this. But, you know, there needs to be actually more studies. There's only a couple of studies globally that actually have studied offenders in prison and worked out that the majority of them actually not only had contact offended, but were multiple times.
One thing that you'll find from the study released by the AIC today, one of the disturbing factors is the frequency of the offending. The longer it went over time, the frequency became less. So in other words, the interval between their viewings and their payings would become less, but also equally important, the amount they were willing to pay went up over time. So the interval, shorter, willing to pay more money, and you pay more money, unfortunately, for more explicit activities. So,
yeah, and I think the safest place for them is actually prison.
Tamsin Rose.
Thanks so much. Tamsin Rose from the Herald Sun here. My question is for Nicole Rose. I'm just wondering if you could explain to us the process for AUSTRAC in terms of referring suspicious transactions and what the threshold for that was, and what the formal mechanism or guidelines were for referring matters to law enforcement agencies.
There's a whole range, but what will happen is we'll get hundreds of thousands of reports. Some of that will be triaged by systems, others by human beings who will actually look at pattern analysis and things that are an issue. Our analysts, financial analysts in AUSTRAC, will actually review them and actually work up something that they think will be useful to law enforcement, because what we want to do is actually provide actionable intelligence, not just pass transactions along. So when we see something that looks at the topologies and methodologies that we know are present for certain crimes, we will then actually relay them to states and territories or to Commonwealth agencies for further investigation. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I'm happy that
Anyone else want to add to that?
Please.
Paul Carp.
Paul Carp from Guardian Australia. Thanks very much. I wanted to ask Commissioner Kershaw about the Clover Moore inflated travel figures investigation. Did you interview Angus Taylor and his staff in the course of that investigation? And did the New South Wales Police express a view to the AFP about whether an offence had been committed under the New South Wales Criminal Code when they handed that case over to you?
Okay, so personally I didn't interview him, if that's what you're asking me, but if it's the agency, I'm not aware that the Minister was interviewed or even offered an interview. We've been pretty clear in the decision-making process that we came to not be able to substantiate any offences being committed. I didn't see the actual referral myself from New South Wales Police, but I did receive a call from the Commissioner Fuller as a courtesy call to let me know that he was referring that through to us. I think it was around, I want to say around not Boxing Day, Christmas Eve, I think around the 24th of December. And the referral was made to us, and then we assessed that material and made that decision.
But did he express a view about whether or not a crime had been committed under the New South Wales Criminal Code?
Not to me, no.
Rosie Lewis.
Rosie Lewis from the Australian, thanks for your speeches. Just back on encryption, are you finding, two or three of you, that the digital platforms are being obstructionist in terms of talking to you guys and letting you into the dark web? Are you hopeful that there may be a resolution there with the companies, or is it more likely that new laws are required?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. It's a balance for the industry, I guess, to have, you know, if you're using these tools commercially and then, you know, being able to sell them and so on, and market them that way. I think they can do more in this area, and they can let us in. And maybe there's a day when we were embedded in Microsoft at one stage and companies like that. I think us working with the Cloud Act will help a lot because we'll be able to be a bit faster in our country-to-country request for evidence or breaking a white website open, so to speak, without having to use what we call police-to-police, which is fine. But when you have to collect the evidence and, say, secure it for an Australian prosecution, it can become quite challenging with these companies, and we'd like to see them work faster for us in that area because it slows down the judicial process. I think also we could probably give them the challenge to say, what are you going to do about it? You've actually got all these networks and criminals on your systems and your platforms. You know, what are you going to do about it? And that's something that I think that conversation needs to continue on, and I think they can do better, and they should. They have to.
When you challenge them over that, what do they say?
Some are pretty good. I think we've got a long way to go though, because I guess, you know, they're commercial entities often, and they're in it for profit. I mean, let's be honest about that. So that's an interesting conversation. However, what we sort of say is, and we'll probably move into this space, I definitely will. If I'm feeling as though certain companies are not cooperating, we will actually end up outing them and probably damaging their reputation. And that's one of the techniques law enforcement has used before, to say if you're a company that are going to be obstructionists with law enforcement and not help us out when it comes to protecting our children, then again, all bets are off when it comes to that for us. So
why not do that now? I mean,
you probably will see that.
Asking for this for quite some time.
I think you will see us sort of, we sort of have, we just haven't had a loud enough voice, I think, collectively.
There's a loud hailer here. You're most welcome to use it right now. John Millard.
Thank you, Sarah. John Millard inside Canberra. Thank you, Ms Rose and gentlemen, for your insightful addresses. You inevitably concentrated on aspects of criminology, law enforcement and so forth, and policing. Do you think enough concentration is made of the sorts of people and sociological or psychological points of view of where such people come from? Now, without getting into profiling at all, do you think, having caught these perpetrators, do you think something could be learned from them, and particularly from the policing point of view, Commissioner?
Yes, and there's been quite a lot of study, and this is a dark hidden secret by these individuals. They know it's wrong, and they go to extreme lengths to hide it because it is a taboo within society, let alone be a crime. So what you see on the surface is not normally what you get, and some of the most prolific offenders will spend a long time grooming other adults to accept them as decent human beings who, you know, there's one case in the US where he would say no to looking after other people's children. He was a caretaker at a local church, and he was one of America's most prolific offenders. And what he would do is say no regularly, and then eventually they'd say, oh, you know, so-and-so is a good guy, and we'll get him to look after our kids, and then he'd groom the kids, and then away he goes. So to profile him is really difficult. He's one of the only ones that was in his interviews, and when he was debriefed, he was able to self-actualise himself as I am who I am. Most of these people will fight it and say, I'm not into this. This was a one-off sort of thing, and you know, I made a mistake. My view is that these people are hardwired this way, so very difficult to be rehabilitated. We've just got to prevent them from reoffending. They do reoffend, and I think there needs to be more work done on this about the profile and what makes a child sex offender. There's not enough out there in my view, and it's probably not us. It's not necessarily our lane. I think there's some other research that can be done.
Mike, you want to add to that?
Yeah, sure. From working in this space since 2003, it's very difficult to profile anybody and the demographics, and this will show. Even way back then, the very first job the AFP major job, we had 400 odd search warrants around the country in Operation Hawks, and there was everybody from doctors, teachers, police, unemployed people. There was no part of society that was not touched. It's one of the very few crime types that you cannot profile demographically. It is not an old bloke in a trench coat. Right? And it's also not just men. You know, there are some women, albeit a lot less than men, but it is something that is very, very difficult to profile. That's why you must use alternate techniques to be able to have a crack.
It would be remiss of me to not use this opportunity to talk to you, Reece, about another unrelated topic. The AFP raids on the News Corp journalist home, Annika Smethurst, and the ABC journalists. The Attorney-General has even expressed frustration with the length of time that this is taking. Contrast that with the Angus Taylor, done and dusted, nothing to see here. This investigation is continuing and journalists feel like they're being done over for doing their jobs.
Yeah, I think, well, I'm on the record now about it, and I spoke to ABC yesterday about it. You know, I support my officers. You know, they do take an oath that they'll, you know, serve without fear or favour or ill will towards others, and act objectively and enforce the law. I did say that I felt as though we could have improved our communication in those matters, and that's just for me having a look at it. But they're doing their job, and they believe that they were serious matters with national security implications, and I support them in that function. Part of that then was the trigger for me to say, and I said it at estimates, my first estimates, which was interesting.
It's always interesting.
was that I'd brought in John Lawler, a very well respected law enforcement officer, and highly decorated and professional and objective, for him to have a really good look at it, to say, look, is there any way that we can improve it in the way that we handle, say if we were to handle this matter again, would we do it differently? The answer is probably yes. However, we still search for, you know, and follow the evidence trail. So that's why I said we probably could have improved our communication on what the expectations are and what our processes are. So we have a new framework, and we have an opportunity now to look at things differently and take into account harm, and the Minister's given us a direction, as has the Attorney with DPP. We can now look at things a little bit differently, and maybe even have other government departments add value before it comes to the AFP. We're working with other government departments on this to make sure that everyone understands what we're doing, and we're not out there to traverse across press freedoms or anything like that.
What is your view of journalists in democracy?
Well, I said I'm a supporter, so, you know, I believe in our democracy and, you know, the rights that we all have, and we're not trying to traverse across that. It's just happened that way. So, and, you know, we're navigating our way through it as best we can. What's holding the process up now is obviously we have 2 court matters, you know, that are still ongoing. So we've had to basically suspend those matters until the court processes are finalised.
All right. I think we might end it there on that note. Everybody, can you please join me in thanking our 3 guests, Reece, Kershaw, Nicole, Rose? Thank you.